call here from Sarah. I believe she has a question for Miss O'Neill.
Okay.
All right, Sarah, you're on the full story.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering, what would you say is the biggest difference between you and your opponent?
Well, Sarah, probably the biggest difference would be that I've been in the courtroom for a lot of years and tried cases and been in the youth court for 10 years. My opponent has been in the Senate and has really not had a litigation or courtroom kind of practice. I think that would probably be the biggest difference.
Now, I think it's kind of funny that Sarah asked that because we actually had an emailed question of that very nature when somebody emailed us. I'm glad, Sarah, thank you for mentioning that. Okay.
Sure, there you go.
Yeah. All right. So I've imagined through all your time throughout here, you've helped hundreds of teens, possibly even thousands of teens, throughout your time as a public defender. Can you share with us your most memorable case that you've had to deal with?
Oh, wow. The most memorable, I guess, would be probably involving human trafficking.
Wow.
Had a young lady who started showing up in youth court when she was 13 on small things like trespassing or running away or drug possession. And after several visits, I just realized there's more to this story.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, she was involved in prostitution.
Wow. And
we don't really have a lot of resources
mm-hmm.
for victims of human trafficking. And human trafficking, people think of that as girls coming from other countries.
Right.
And not girls that actually are growing up on the streets of our own county.
Right. Not in our backyard.
Exactly. And so I raised money, used some of my own money, and
mm-hmm.
actually got her an airplane ticket to out of state and flew her myself.
Wow. Out
of state to a home that was specifically geared to girls who had that kind of history.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just tell you this, when we were on the plane headed there, and I asked her, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? And she said, this.
Wow.
And what she meant, it was starting over. I mean,
mm-hmm.
and we're talking about a young lady who had seen horrific things.
Right. I can't even imagine, what they have to go through.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's, I think, one of the importance of youth court is kind of digging down deeper in there, especially if you're that defense attorney. So what is this person's story? What's really motivating him to do this? And you can find these abused children, you haven't been able to help them. And that kind of takes us to one of our viewer-submitted questions, and this comes from Paul in Ridgeland. And he asked, I noticed how Staci has been a public defender. I believe public defenders provide a great service, but I feel most of them grow attached to the defendants and have sympathy to their situation. I feel this is a good trait for a public defender, but not necessarily for a judge whose goal is to provide justice. So my question for Staci is, will she be able to separate those feelings when she's a judge and look things in a neutral viewpoint? And kind of add to that, does being that public defender help you as a judge?
I think that's a fair question. One of the first comments that I got from one of the bailiffs at the courthouse when I told them that I was going to run, he said, Staci, you can't take them home with you. And I said, I know that. The children that I've taught for years in youth ministry and children's ministry would tell you that I'm very tough.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is a time as a public defender when you are very compassionate,
mm-hmm.
and there's a time when you have to look your client in the eye and say, stop being stupid.
Right.
And I think that as a judge, I understand there will be times when I will have to hand out punishment or sentencing, and I think that in a lot of ways that can be the most compassionate thing you can do for a young person,
mm-hmm.
Is to give them whatever
right.
that disposition is, because that's going to change their life.
Right. And this kind of leads me to something that was in the news recently. So on September 28th, a 14-year-old boy went into Townville Elementary School with a gun and opened fire. He killed 6-year-old Jacob Hall and wounded 2 others. And early in the day, that teenager also killed his father in their home. Now, as the boy was only 14, he was charged in family court for the murders and the shooting. However, in Mississippi, a juvenile as young as 13 can be charged an adult for serious felonies such as this. So my question to you, Staci, is should a 14-year-old who murders 2 people and partakes in school shooting be charged as a juvenile or as an adult? What is your opinion on something like that? On some of these very serious crimes like
Yeah,
this?
well, it's not
And how to deal with that.
Yeah, it's not really a question of my opinion about it, because we have no choice but to follow the law. And if the youth court doesn't have jurisdiction of it, then your opinion about it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But that is the law, and I've had.
I think to me judges do that. They don't follow the law anymore. I think that's
Yeah.
a good thing. That what's the statute say?
Yeah.
Not your personal opinion. What's the statute say?
I mean, I've had 13-year-olds who have been tried as an adult because they were arrested, and it came to youth court first because of the age, but
Right.
when the court recognized that it was really one of those crimes that fits into the adult category, it went straight up. So yeah, it's a hard thing when a child does something, but we see serious crimes in youth court that are just shy of what you've just
Right.
mentioned.
And how do you usually handle situations like? Because obviously when these you have actual victims that have to see the justice, and you have this 13 or 14-year-old test. How do you balance that?
Well, as a judge, you balance that by following the law.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a crime that remains in youth court, then you hear the evidence and you make a decision based on the facts.
Right.
And then in youth court, the hearings are 2-part. The first one is guilt or innocence,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that's been established, then you go to the next phase and you say, okay, what will it take to make sure this doesn't happen again? What can we do to steer this child in a different direction so that he doesn't end up in circuit court or end up
Right.
in a grave or end up hurting someone else?
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned how church and religion is very important in your life. You quoted Isaiah just earlier. How important do you put religion into coming down with sentences for these juveniles or whatever? How much does that play into your if your time as a judge, your beliefs?
Well, are we talking about juvenile court or adult court as far as criminal?
Take both of them.
Well, in juvenile court, what's best in the best interest of that child, I think we've got some incredible faith-based organizations who are willing to help mentor and tutor young people. But of course, their involvement in those activities is totally voluntary. And, we have great community support in that.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as, I don't know that my faith would play into someone's specific
Right.
disposition.
Because the reason I asked that, we see the Supreme Court judge in Alabama doing he does when it comes to the gay marriage, and like I said, I think when you said it earlier, we have to focus on the law. And I think, like I said, judges have gone away from that. And these, they have these activist judges, which
judges should follow the law. They shouldn't make new law. And
Absolutely.
Sometimes there are gaps in the law that maybe you encounter a situation. I know that when social media first started becoming an issue with teenagers and in the courtroom, the law was sort of slow to keep up with
Mhm.
social media
Right.
issues and bullying on social media. So sometimes there are gaps in the law, but for the most part, the law is well established.
Now, I did have a question from Alyssa and Madison. Alyssa, I'm sorry, Sarah already covered that question. She had the same question about what would y'all do, what's the difference between y'all. But kind of on that same path there, what problems do you see now with the county court that you think you can make improvements on?
I think one of the biggest problems that we have are we've lost resources. We don't have those disposition alternatives.
Mhm.
We had a program called AOP, which was the Adolescent Offender Program. It was an after-school program where the judge could sentence that young person to participate in
Mhm.
that after-school program. It was federally funded, the funding got cut, and so we've lost that.
So how as a judge can you try
Well, there are youth court judges around our state that enlist the help of grant writers and develop programs for community service and mentoring and provide options. The statute has lots of options that we should choose from, but they're not actually available in Madison County. I think we have the resources in Madison County to do that. And I know I've talked to several law enforcement officers who would give voluntarily their time to do some sort of boot camp
Yeah.
for delinquents.
Right. Just give them that other option besides incarceration.
Exactly, yeah.
Because like I said, I think if you lock a lot of these 14s or 13-year-olds up, that's always going to be in their mind, and that really helps to put them in the reciprocation back into it when they turn 18 years old. And I think that's, to me, you may disagree with me, but I think that's really the goal of this youth court, is to make sure that these kids don't come back as 18-year-olds and
Right.
hurt somebody or hurt themselves or be a detriment to society. We want to make these people a asset to society, not a detriment. So we talked a lot about youth court. Now, what about your experience when it comes to all these other, like I said, we cover things up to $200,000 in there, and you said I think that was the most in there.
Yeah, after youth court, then the rest of what happens in county court would be mostly civil lawsuits. There are some criminal type matters that are appealed from city court and justice court that
Right.
come up. Most of those are DUIs.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at everything else, I went back and looked at every category of what type of cases were heard in county court, and I've got experience in all but a couple.
Right.
And so 16 years of litigating cases, and you just see a lot of different stuff.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I've got, and in my experience is some on the plaintiff side, some on the defense side. I've
Mhm.
represented individuals and corporations.
Right.
And that's the funny thing about this job is that, or this campaign, I guess, I have lawyers who are supporting me from both sides of the bar.
Yeah.
The plaintiff side, the defense side, the prosecution side, the criminal defense side. What that says to me is that they know my background
Right.
as a lawyer.
And what are some of your key endorsements that you have?
Well, I'm not asking for endorsements, and so I've not sought any. I just know that the ones who have contributed to my campaign, and the ones who have given me their personal
Right.
good wishes.